Okay. Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of ShiftED podcast, plugging through the school year here, 25-26, getting to an end soon. I have a great guest today. I'm really excited about this chat. I reached out to her via LinkedIn and gladly accepted to come. I have Gina Tesoriero, who is an educator, researcher, a big advocate for STEAM or STEM learning. We say STEAM up here in Quebec, but STEM is very awesome as well. Great experiences in New York City public system as a teacher, curriculum designer, ed tech leader. And she kind of bridges this classroom with the research. And for all of you that know me, I love research and looking at numbers and the stories behind those numbers. And we'll explore a little bit about that today with Gina. So Gina, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So Gina, I guess my first question is kind of, when did the classroom start to shift for you in a way that you wanted to move a bit more into the research area? Like, were there moments that you can recall that where that connection started to happen for you, where the classroom, you wanted to start looking more at the research behind it rather than just being a teacher? I mean, just being a teacher is an amazing thing, but, expanding kind of into that research area.
Yeah, I do actually. I had been introduced very early on to STEM in the very beginning of its world in K-12, I think, by museums like the Hall of Science or the American Museum of Natural History through programs that they lead for teachers. And I started to bring that like design thinking and kind of STEM into my classroom. I was a self-contained special education teacher. So I taught the same 12 students all day long as their 7th middle school teacher. And I taught English, math, social studies, and science in the same class. But when I started to bring in STEM, I just noticed a lot of different types of engagement that my students typically had in the typical kind of learning that we did in the classroom. And I wanted to investigate what about STEM was so special. And so that is why I decided to start the PhD program.
Nice. And you've completed it, right?
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, I finished in November, thank you, or December was when it all got finally accepted. But yeah.
Right. And what was your, thesis or main focus in the research that you wanted to do? Could you flush that out for us a bit?
Yeah, my research was focused on how recent graduates of high school were using tools like ChatGPT, to navigate their daily lives, academic lives, personal lives, all the things. And so I worked with 2 different groups of students, or former students that had recent graduates of high school. One of those groups were my former students that were in my classroom when they were in 7th grade. So that was really exciting. And I just, I talked to these students. I used Gen AI use case scenarios that were just basically descriptions of how different stakeholders are using these tools or could be using them, just to discuss what they think is inbound, out of bounds, what kind of policies they think are good for them and for others to use with their data. And so some of those questions came up. And also, I engaged with my former students in Gen AI problem solving, where we took some things that they were facing in their lives that were challenging for them and kind of thought through it with ChatGPT and discussed, really important things along the way. And so I talk about that too.
Amazing. That's really cool. And you work with a lot of, neurodivergent students throughout your career as a teacher and then into the research. What do we need to change? Here in Quebec, I'll just give you an example, is most of our students that, have learning disabilities or, physical disabilities would be integrated within the classroom. Which opens up a whole plethora of different problems and, management and strategic planning that needs to take place. How do you kind of see that redesign happening where there's more of this inclusivity and feeling like everyone is a part of what's going on within the schools?
Yeah, I think the first step for designing learning environments that are really, truly like accessible, inclusive, empowering, all the things we want for all the students in the classrooms is to design with them, because every person with neurodiversity or not, they still have different preferences and ways that they want to learn and a different learning profile. So I think it really takes just the time to sit and explore what's best for each learner, like through conversations or getting to know them in different activities and like really designing with them. I think that's the way I've been able to do it in my classroom and in my research. And every time that you engage with a learner and try to design, like to minimize obstacles or design where the obstacles don't even come up, it's made me kind of better at getting like a jump off for the next student next time, because now I'm like, I have all these different experiences of what students prefer, you know?
Right. I guess that's kind of differentiation in, meets UDL design, like where the voice of the student is in a part of the planning of.
Yeah.
Because I know that there always is this struggle of how do I differentiate a classroom where, how do I get to the wide walls, where everyone feels like they're getting what the lesson is or whatever theme we're working on or topic, content area. What are some of your like best strategies that you've noticed personally through differentiation with the more of the academically struggling students, I guess, that we need to widen those walls for?
Yeah. And I think the difference here between like designing with the students and like the typical way we do things is that we get to know the students before and as we're designing. It's a collaborative thing. It's not like it's something created and then changed for each student. It's something that is created with all of them in mind, which is harder when teachers don't get time to know their students or have too many students or all the things teachers have to do. But so it's really about an intentional designing from the beginning and so every assignment would look different in each classroom and in each year. But it's also being really clear on what your goal is for that assignment or that activity. I see a lot. There's just, if our goal is really for students to, use like observations to inform like questions or something about a document or a lab experiment or whatever subject it's in, then focusing on that, and it doesn't matter if they're writing about it or if they're making a play about it or if they're drawing about it. Like if they're doing the thing, then we just have to find more ways to accept what that thing looks like. But it's also that a lot of the ways that subjects are structured, it's not the way that students are going to learn best. And so it starts with even student voice before we decide what the curriculum looks like.
Right. And there's often that kind of like clashing of doing the school part with doing what we know what works best, like we know strategies, but oftentimes those strategies are very hard to manipulate into this outcome-based kind of, pedagogy that we have to deal with. How do you navigate some of those kinds of structures? So we have these structures we have to follow. We need evaluation. We need to, follow all of that. At the same time, how do we get kids' voices and their inputs and their choice? And like, is there a bridge that we can, put across so that we can join these two? Or are they just destined to be, a struggle all the time to like find the connections?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hear it a lot. And I think I would answer it differently as if I were in the classroom or me now from away from that space a little bit. But I think, we know what works isn't really a true statement because we know what works for, 60, 70% of the students. And so that's not working. If a bridge works 70% of the time, nobody would go over it.
That's very true.
And yet we have sometimes 70% graduation rates in some of our U.S. schools. And so are they successful? So is what is happening working is the first thing I would say. But like if we're working from a place where, the standards are the standards and that's what we teach, then I think we sit and have, a talk with each student or groups of students and talk about it and say, hey, these are the 5 main things we need to learn this year. And if that's impossible because the standards are so cumbersome, then maybe we need to reconsider things. But to say like, these are the great 5 things, like which one are you interested in? Maybe you can help me design a unit for the class since this is what you're interested in. And then like you kind of have like a student helping you design this. They may be a leader for this unit. And then, I find students are way more willing to engage with what their peers have created for them. So it just takes us thinking outside of this is what works, because we have to be honest that it doesn't work for everyone. And so taking those folks who it doesn't work for and talking to them. A lot of times we do student voice efforts and we gather student voice in a genuine, intentional way and in a way that informs design. That's great. But who are we asking? Are we asking the students who all excelled and got top of the class that year? Are we asking the students that are able to stay after school because they don't have to take care of their like young brothers and sisters? So making sure that the people we're asking, though, are ones that struggle too, that might be able to tell us, because we keep asking the same kids, we're going to get the same answers that the teachers keep telling us, because the teachers are just like those kids that excelled in school, if that makes any sense.
Totally. Well, I mean, I've seen this too, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Like when I do a lot of makery, right? Like making stuff, and, we bring in maker spaces and creative spaces for kids. We'll come in for a day or two in a school and engage the students in hands-on. They get to kind of decide how they want to approach whatever, stations we've set up or activities that we've put in place. And we've always are surprised with the teacher's comments of, I never thought that student would be able to do it, And the opposite, the academically strong students are the ones that are like, oh boy, I'm not touching this thing because I don't want to make any mistakes with it. Do you notice that? Like, is there a connection, or in your experiences, does that ring true that soon as we kind of get rid of this blanket of like, you sit there and listen and I'll tell you, our school structure, and you get more to a hands-on student kind of openness to it, that we start to expose the greatness in all of the students and also some of the weaknesses where we need to develop a little bit more of example resilience when it comes to, facing challenges. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've actually saw that when I created a STEM course with another teacher at my middle school. It was offered to the very higher achieving advanced students in the school. And I was noticing when I was working with them that they had a harder time with open-ended, things that were outside of a rubric kind of idea. Meanwhile, in my self-contained classroom, they're just trying again, getting creative and thinking outside of the box, things I would never think of. And, one of my students summed it up for me when I was describing like the design process and with a visual and with words that just, they're not in a line per se, but it looked neat and organized. And one of my students said, "Miss, no offense, but are you really trying to teach us that if we fail, we have to try again and like keep doing it, like that it's not something we do every day?" And it was just a whole, like it kind of, changed my perspective on that. And yeah, and in the we called it the SP program, when the STEM kids they wanted to know what the right answer was and like what was worth what points. And they were worrying about things like, so all of this is to say, I wonder sometimes if there is a room for some growth in the types of skills we're looking for. Like, I think the next generation science standards in the US, like, are moving in that direction. We're trying to make learning more about like practices and not about just content that's static. And I think it's a step in the right direction. But yeah, I think we need to look and see, what are the standards that our students think are most important for them in the futures that they perceive. In some ways, we're also very unable to see the future that's beyond what we know, like technologically. But the students, I feel like, have like a bigger view of what could be possible in the next 10 years,
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think listening to those students, again, coming back to listening to what they're saying and kind of co-designing as with them equally, I guess it brings me to this kind of what you were talking about with AI, with artificial intelligence. how can we engage more of our neurodiverse students with these powerful tools? Like you said, we're all going to be using these. We're going to need the skills, and we're going to also need the soft skills that come along with it. What are some pathways into that, and using more of generative AI to, again, widen those walls in our classroom?
Yeah, I think it starts with curiosity with our learners because they're using these tools. And so it's important for us to ask how they're using it. I think a lot of spaces are making it not a comfortable place to talk about using Gen AI tools. And that is a scary road because we want these youth, these recent graduates, young adults, our friends, our parents, like we want them to tell us how they're using these tools so that we can think through it with them and learn new ways to innovate together or ways that we have to be extra careful. And the thing is, the opportunities and risks of Gen AI tools change every day. And if we're not creating the spaces where we can discuss these with everyone we care about, if we're not able to discuss it, then we really risk having missed opportunities where we could help dive more into critical digital literacies with them and improve our own digital literacy in this new world that's kind of moving faster than our policies and practice. There's always something that gets through the cracks that we're didn't think about. And so I think that happens when we use these tools in little silos where we're not talking about it and creating a space where it's okay to talk about how you explore with this really helpful tool.
Yeah. I kind of see we're talking a lot about the tool instead of what you're saying about the ethical use and support, the conversations that need to be had about a powerful tool and how it influences society and what we do. And I think those conversations too are so important to have, and that everybody has a voice in those. Because like you said, I mean, we're at such a clip here with the turnover of AI tools. It's impossible for the educational system to ever. I mean, if you think of kind of the mindset of where it is, it still seems kind of back in the past a little bit, how it's designed.
Yeah, and it's exponential, with these new tools becomes the possibility for new tools that we don't even know yet. And so if digital literacy, critical digital AI literacy isn't a part of every conversation in every class, it's not the technology teacher's job. It's not, the guidance counselor's job. It's everyone's job. It's everyone's job to talk about tools. How do they use it? We want students to be transparent. Our teachers being transparent, talk about it. Explore, be open, open the door to your private Gen AI use is going to create the kind of digital literacy that we need to handle any new technology that comes.
Right. And how are you hearing, what are the stories about usage? What are the tools that get used the most often in your field, and maybe why, if you have those answers as well?
Yeah, for me in my research, I specifically just looked at ChatGPT. It was easy. It's what I used at the time. It was free. You could sign in privately or not. And so that's what I focused on. But what really came out was some empowering things. One of my former students, Lucia, used ChatGPT to make her own writing tutor in grad school that would ask her questions one by one for a task. She would answer verbally using voice to text. And then she just had this talk back and forth kind of tool with ChatGPT at any hour. She was a full-time teacher and going to school part-time. So she couldn't really have access to all the resources that were available to her. So she needed a writing tutor. And, watching her experience that, I also had a group of students who were very afraid to use it because of fear of getting in trouble for using it or fear of getting addicted to using it. Just because, they really didn't they lacked these conversations about what is responsible use. But through their help, through their engagement, we ended up learning how ChatGPT can use to help them find jobs and identify some bias in the hiring. So it was a very cool tool for that. And then finally, the last case study in my research is one of my former students who was very much a leader in the co-design of this research. And he used it in a way I wouldn't really be supportive of, that seemed a little copy and paste. And I had to approach it, with curiosity and talk through it with him to learn about why. And what I learned from that experience is that whether we are okay with how people are using ChatGPT or AI or not, we need to be curious about how they're using it, because when we learn how they're using it, it tells us what we're missing in the learning environment that they needed. So at the very least, if you don't like ChatGPT or anything, looking into how it's being used can tell you how to create a better environment, learning environment.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. I love too that your student, that creation of a custom bot, like forget it. I'll just make my own, and it will help me with exactly what I want because I'll tell it this is what I need.
It's empowering, right? It's like this empowering. It's like a learning partner when used correctly. But I think what's important is that the same way to use it correctly is not going to be the same every day. And so we need to always talk about it. It's an evolving, changing monster, that we need to just be 10 steps ahead of, if at all possible,
Right. And well, Gina, this has been it's just a great chat. I've really enjoyed it. And I have one question that I'd love to just leave on. What were some of the surprises in your research, maybe happy surprises that you discovered that kind of excited you and kind of informed your practice more than you expected?
I think it was how beautiful it is to ask, recent graduates to design for their peers, and how much care comes out when we're creating a shared goal of a co-design. So I learned so much about my students, my former students who I've known for already 15 years, some. And so I learned even more about them and even more about this group that I didn't have a former relationship with. I learned about who they were as a person, what they prioritize. I learned so much about them from how they designed for their peers. And it was just, a really beautiful experience. I think co-designing or engaging together with ChatGPT and talking about it okay, well, what can we trust and what can't we trust? Or how can we learn to trust it? And just having those critical conversations around that shared object really opened up opportunities for me to learn about these really important individuals that I didn't have before. So, yeah.
Amazing. What a great research. What a great lesson you pulled out of it. And again, I just feel very appreciative that you took some time to share all this with us. I love it, Gina. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.